As much as any other titan of the industry, Capcom are about as synonymous with gaming as the curtain haircut is with the 1990s. With a diverse roster of games and a back catalogue that spans decades, it's likely that, young or seasoned, at least one of Capcom's games was there for you at one point or another. The company have not only set the benchmark for the fighting, survival horror and lawyer 'em up genres, but are in many cases the originators of these very genres in the first place. But how much do you really know about Capcom? Capcom's story, one almost as old as gaming itself, is a twisting narrative filled with risky business ventures, dizzying triumphs, heartbreaking lows, redemption, and a whole lot of cancelled or shelved projects that were sacrificed along the way. Researching this list was a rabbit hole that only deepened the further we went, but we'll try to summarise the most fascinating bits for you as best we can over the course of the next 10 entries. I'm Ashton from TripleJump, and here are 10 things you didn't know about Capcom. Number 10. Capcom was founded out of IREM software. You might recognise IREM software as an iconic brand in their own right, being the ones behind classic titles such as R-Type and Lode Runner. But did you know that they were, in many ways, the precursors to Capcom? Kenzo Sugimoto founded a company called IPM, which stood for International Playing Machines, in 1974. At first, IPM's purpose was to build and install video game machines for small local business residencies. But given the increasing demand, this turned into a service for renting out said cabinets. In 1979, IPM changed its name to IREM Corporation. During this time, Sugimoto formed another company called IRM Software and worked in both companies before leaving IREM in 1983. IRM later became Capcom, in a joint venture between themselves and another company that specialised in electronic game machines. You might think the name change was a move to avoid confusion between the two, near-identical company names that Sugimoto was already a part of, but it was actually to avoid being mistaken for IBM Computers, who even filed a complaint on this very issue. Crikey! Not very imaginative with names, are they, these big tech companies? But where does the name Capcom come from, you may ask? Well, number 9, Capcom stands for Capsule Computers. Before joining with IRM, Kenzo Sugimoto's other subsidiary company, Japan Capsule Computers Company, were devoted to the manufacture and distribution of electronic game and entertainment machines. As a result, the catchy moniker of Capcom was settled on, being a clipped compound of the words capsule and computers. This name was also thought of as a way for the company to set their products apart from the increasingly prevalent personal computer market. The choice of the word computer for this is obvious, but where does capsule come from? Well, inspired by the success of his personally owned business, which he used to sell pachinko machines to cotton candy shops, a venture which led to the creation of IPM in the first place, Sugimoto saw the potential of electronic entertainment as a tourist draw. As the term arcade machine hadn't come to exist yet, the word capsule was used to imply how these computers should be likened to a capsule packed to the brim with fun. Makes sense, I suppose, although the word capsule just makes me think of the awful cod liver oil supplements people have to take once they reach 30. Number 8, Capcom have 2 main teams responsible for their games. Over the years, Capcom's divisional structure has fallen into 2 main camps. Division 1, who focus on major franchises and international releases, including the likes of Resident Evil, Mega Man, Devil May Cry, Dead Rising, Dragon's Dogma and more, and Division 2, who oversee more traditional IPs which usually target audiences in Asia. Although not quite on the level of household names, you might recognise some of Division 2's titles, which include Monster Hunter, Ace Attorney, and Onimusha Warlords. Also belonging to Division 2 are Capcom's online-focused and tournament-based franchises, which, as you could probably imagine, have gathered something of an enthusiastic following over the years. The support of this community and its association with the beat-em-up franchises like Street Fighter and Marvel vs. Capcom are a huge reason for the company's current legendary status in the industry. Capcom even runs the Capcom Cup, a competitive tournament specifically focused on the Street Fighter series, which started in 2013 and allows hardcore beat-em-up pros to compete in a 32-man format championship on a global stage, preceded by the Capcom Pro Tour, which encompasses other prestigious gaming tournaments like the Evolution Championship Series and DreamHack. Number 7. Capcom was saved from bankruptcy by an adult mahjong game. The 80s were hard on the video game industry, not least of all for Capcom. On the verge of bankruptcy, Capcom had to apply unusual methods to save itself, and those methods included getting a little bit saucy. And no, I'm not talking about a venture into the world of condiments. During this period, an adult game of strip mahjong called Mahjong Gakken, or Mahjong Academy if you want to get English translation about this, a tile-based parlour game where you'd be rewarded with naughty pictures of ladies in various stages of undress, which was developed in secret by former producer Yoshiki Okamoto. Sugimoto saw potential, but refused to release it under the company's banner, and instead under the company name Yuga, possibly as in, "You gonna ruin our reputation otherwise." One of the game's main attractions, aside from, the obvious, was that you could pull a sexy prank on the girls. God knows what that would involve, but we couldn't find any footage of it, so you'll just have to use your imagination. The game was credited with saving the company and went on to outsell Ghosts and Goblins, used AI that would eventually be repurposed for Street Fighter 2 and Final Fight, and even featured pixel art from regular Capcom collaborator Aikman, who also worked on Street Fighter and Red Dead Revolver. Number 6. The 2020 ransomware attacks. On November 2nd, 2020, Capcom's servers were affected by ransomware unleashed by the Ragnar Locker hacker group. The group's actions reportedly included serious crimes such as blackmail and stealing 1 terabyte of sensitive corporate data. By mid-November, the group then began putting leaks from the hack online, including plans for upcoming games, contact information for up to 350,000 of the company's employees and partners, and more. Some of these totally unconfirmed in-production games included Dragon's Dogma 2, Street Fighter 6, remakes of Final Fight and Power Stone, and the mysteriously titled Resident Evil Outrage, a game presumably about Chris Redfield seeing something that he didn't like on Twitter. I refuse to call it X. To make matters worse, but for different reasons, artist and author Judy A. Jurassic filed a lawsuit in June 2021 against Capcom as a result of the leaks, asserting that Capcom had used unauthorized images from her 1996 architecture reference book, Surfaces, in their cover art and numerous assets of Resident Evil 4, Devil May Cry, and others. Before the matter could go any further, the dispute was settled amicably out of court in February 2022. Capcom really could have saved themselves a lot of bother by just looking up a how to make video game textures tutorial video on YouTube. Number 5. Street Fighter the Movie the Game was initially intended to be Street Fighter 3. Back in the 90s, Street Fighter the Movie was predicted, not least by Capcom, to be a huge success with audiences and critics alike. Therefore, the next installment in their landmark video game franchise needed to showcase the glorious action hero likeness of Jean-Claude Van Damme and Kylie Minogue von Facekicker, as they would appear in the final film. And that would obviously be the benchmark by which all future Street Fighter-related media would be measured, right? However, implementing Mortal Kombat-style motion capture was no easy task, resulting in Capcom handing the reins to a relatively small studio who understandably found themselves overwhelmed. Another obstacle was the fact that many of the actors, unlike those used for Mortal Kombat animations, did not boast previous martial arts experience, making some of the moves in the final game appear somewhat unconvincing. A spiralling development, the critical and commercial failure of the film, and the appearance of other innovative fighting games like Virtua Fighter in arcades swiftly changed Capcom's ambitious plans for the title. As a result, they dropped the 3 from the title, simply releasing it as a movie tie-in game instead. The console port of Street Fighter the Movie the Game also featured some substantial changes, such as new voice work, more balanced gameplay, and redone sprites, but it failed to make an impact. Hadouken, more like Hadou can't. Got 'em. Number 4, Dino Crisis 3's initial concept and story were changed due to the 9/11 attacks. Dino Crisis went from being Resident Evil but with dinosaurs to a successful series on its own merits, with an excellent sequel, iconic characters, and a debut outing which fans are still clamouring for a remake of today. Unfortunately, the perplexing Xbox exclusive Dino Crisis 3 really put the brakes on the franchise. The game's plot ignored the sequel's cliffhanger ending, and instead launched the player into an unrelated story set thousands of years in the future on a spaceship filled with dinosaur-alien hybrids, which, in our opinion, makes it less of a dino crisis and more of a monsters with tiny arms in space crisis, which admittedly is a far less catchy title. Dino Crisis fans were left wondering why this game chose not to continue the adventures of Regina and her time-travelling crusade against the Third Energy Project, with the answer being, it almost did. Leaked concept art, battling through a devastating dinosaur-infested city, suggesting number 3 would have continued the original story. However, with other prominent games also being affected by the world-changing events of September 11th, 2001, Capcom scrapped this potentially insensitive depiction before the project got too far into development. An understandable rationale to be sure, but we can't help but feel like Capcom threw the baby raptor out with the bathwater here. Number 3, Nintendo affiliation and the Capcom 5. You might have seen that meme of an E3 event in the early 2000s saying, "Long ago the 4 nations lived in harmony." But anyone around then might remember the era resembled more of a video Game of Thrones scenario, with cloak and dagger plotlines in which Capcom was a major character. With the GameCube underperforming, Nintendo looked to Capcom to make 5 exclusive titles for the system to boost its sales. However, although some of these titles would go on to become cult favourites, they didn't exactly light up the sales board, forcing Capcom to consider whether they wanted them remaining on a console with limited exposure. One major success from the Capcom 5 lineup, however, was Resident Evil 4, which was also the one game Capcom had promised would remain a GameCube exclusive no matter what happened. Although Resident Evil 4 was exclusive to the GameCube for a time, from an outsider's perspective, it clearly doesn't make any kind of business sense to have kept it there, which makes the change in approach somewhat understandable. Oh, but don't worry Nintendo, you still have... Let me just check my notes. PN03, a dance-based sci-fi action game, as the one remaining exclusive from the lineup. Capcom 5, more like Capcom Knife, as in Nintendo's back. I'll see myself out. Number 2, Rise of Platinum Games Productions. One of the Capcom 5 games, Beautiful Joe, became a critical darling for its unique presentation and addictive gameplay. Beautiful Joe 2 started development shortly after the original, but the brisk schedule, likely prompted by the original's poor sales, meant that the team was not given time to implement all the features they had wanted. To help with this, a dedicated Clover studio was created, Clover being an abbreviation of Creativity Lover, who were later responsible for unique cult hit games like Okami, Beautiful Joe Red Hot Rumble, and God Hand. However, while the games themselves would find dedicated audiences eventually, the relative lack of profitability of these titles caused significant tensions between Capcom and Clover Studios' Shinji Mikami, which already existed given that Mikami had been very supportive of Resident Evil 4 remaining a GameCube exclusive. The resulting tension led to the closure of Clover Studios, but the developers went on to form Platinum Games. In 2008, Platinum Games announced the Platinum 3, referring to Mad World, Infinite Space and Bayonetta, which would attempt to carry on the Capcom 5's ambitious and original creative spirit. In fact, Bayonetta was inspired by the flashy gun-based combat of Capcom titles like Devil May Cry and PN03. See, Nintendo, we told you that game would be worth hanging on to. And number 1, movie adaptations and external media. Aside from Nintendo, Capcom is likely the most prolific video game outfit at adapting its original properties. You might think, considering the, critical reputation of some of the later live-action Resident Evil sequels, that Capcom wouldn't be too happy about this. But the company saw Western movie adaptations as a chance to raise its profile in foreign markets. The Resident Evil and Street Fighter installments are obvious standouts, but did you also know that there are live-action movies based on the Dead Rising and Monster Hunter franchises, as well as 2 additional Resident Evil movies that are entirely CG and set in the same universe as the games. In other spin-off media, there are Mega Man and Devil May Cry manga, and a fantastic short-lived and now incredibly rare Devil May Cry comic book series from the early 2000s, courtesy of Dreamwave Productions. This adaptation, mostly based on the first game, dramatically fleshes out the game's story and characters, and transforms Dante from a lovable, goofy badass into a genuinely terrifying badass, fighting for his life in a dark fantasy setting, which plays out like a cross between Indiana Jones and Evil Dead, with Matrix-esque gunfights. Now come on, where's that movie, Paul W.S. Anderson? We're waiting!